Welcome, Thriving Marriage family. I'm here with Mark Johnston, our head marriage coach here at High Thrive Coaching, and I'm our heart set, mindset, soul set coach. Try to say that really fast. Primarily mindset coach, but what we're doing is making sure that we're moving forward in productive ways. So if you're just joining us, go ahead and give us a thumbs up. Let us know that you can hear us loud and clear. And yesterday, as some of you saw, we polled the group on what topic you wanted. And the runaway winner was this idea of how to restore trust in your marriage when it has been broken. So I see, I think a couple of you are jumping on. I'm not sure if you can see the update there, Mark. Before we go too much into that, I'm just going to give a bit of business while we're waiting for a couple people to jump on and let you know that I'm due with a baby in 14 days officially from today. So in the next couple weeks, I may be stepping back a little bit more from the group. I just don't want anyone to be alarmed about where I've gone or anything like that. But as always, Mark's here available to answer your questions and help you out in any way that's needed. So this whole idea of how to restore trust when it has been broken in your marriage is a really deep one. It's a really heavy one, and it's a really important one. So we want to give you guys some insights, some steps to take, kind of a high-level overview of what you can do if your spouse has broken your trust or you have been the one to break trust in a marriage. I remember back when Ben and I were dating, and he said, "Heather, be careful. You have my heart, so be careful." And I think that's part of the beautiful nature of marriage, is that we get closer to this person. That's the goal, right? Thanks for the thumbs up. To be more intimately connected with this human being than anyone else in our lives, which leads us in a very vulnerable situation. And that's part of the beauty, but it's also part of what can make it a little scary sometimes. Yeah. Because this person knows you better than anyone. So ideally,
the whole thing about these kinds of relationships is you can't get close to someone unless you open up and you become vulnerable with them. And so, like you said, Ben, you had Ben's heart. It is almost like in a very literal sense. I mean, if he's opening himself up to you and, investing in that relationship, it can absolutely be devastating when those things start crumbling or when that trust is broken because of how open and vulnerable you've been.
Absolutely. When I think about just my relationship personally, there's no one that could hurt me more than Ben, because there's no one that knows me more than him. And that's also what makes our marriage so beautiful. So, making sure that we have that trust is very, very important. And when it's been broken, there are very specific things we need to do to repair that. So, Mark, what are your first initial thoughts? If someone has had their trust broken in their relationship, what is one of the first things that they need to do right off the bat? Okay,
so if their trust has been broken, the other person is the offender, is what we're talking about right now, right?
Right.
So
we'll flip it.
Yeah, we'll flip it over. So let's say that your partner has broken your trust, and you're wondering, okay, what do you do? How do you actually get back into the relationship? And I think in many ways, whether you're the offender or the other person has offended you, there's going to need to be some very similar steps. First off, before any sort of healing can happen, we have to cut off any of the sources of damage. So, a frequent, common example of, when someone says, okay, my trust has been broken, we use the example of infidelity. So let's say your partner has cheated on you. It's not going to do any good at all if that cheating continues to happen. There's no way to repair that trust if the source of damage is continuing. There's going to be lots of things to address in that issue, and it's going to depend on the problem. So there's certain things you would do for infidelity. There's certain things that you should do for dishonesty. Certain things that it's really going to be dependent on the problem, but that source needs to go away.
Exactly. I remember my mentor telling me that a family member, we were going through some challenging times, and they were in the process of still continually crossing boundaries that were hurtful to us. And I was like confused because I felt like I was supposed to forgive. And I just want to clarify this for anyone if they've ever felt this way. But I felt like there was this huge barrier there that I could not trust them. And she said, Heather, it's like they've stabbed a knife in your arm, and real healing doesn't occur until the knife's gone. So that's kind of like what Mark's talking about here. We got to get the knife out. We have to stop the damaging behavior, whatever it is. And like Mark said, addiction is going to look something completely different from, money issues or something like that, right?
Yeah.
But bottom line is you got to get that knife out so then the wound can start to heal. That helps me understand.
Oh,
go ahead.
Sorry. I actually thought you brought up a good point. Like you're saying, okay, aren't I supposed to forgive, right? And I do think to a certain degree that is going to really be helpful to at least be in the spirit of forgiveness. Because if you're trying to work on things, even if the source of pain is still there and there's a lot of contention, it's going to be that much harder to at least support the situation for it to change. So for instance, if there is infidelity going on, and the only interaction that you and your spouse have is this very negative, contentious interaction, it's, yes, you could say that your partner deserves that ire, that anger, but it's not going to help speed the process along of dropping that other person. And that might sound odd, but yes, there's going to need to be a certain amount of understanding and support from you as well as the other person in order to really effectively eliminate that pain, the source of pain.
Absolutely. Hi, Julie. Nice to see you join us. So the first step is stop the damage. Whatever's inflicting this trust, causing the trust to be broken, needs to end. And then the second part is really owning your part. So if you're the one doing the damage, you need to own it. You need to apologize quickly and make every effort to repair that. And if you're the one that's had the trust broken on your spouse's part, your part is to get into that zone of forgiveness. And here is a really important part where we really don't want to lash out, right? Any kind of resentful, I'm going to treat you the way you've been treating me kind of behavior to make them feel your pain. Do you want that, or do you want healing? So you kind of have to take a step there. And if you're the person that's been hurt, and honestly, we've all been hurt at some point in our lives, right? We could all justify or excuse ourselves for the rest of our lives if we wanted to, and we could be right. Is that really going to lead us to happiness, though? So you have to understand that forgiveness isn't so much about them, it's about you, right? So it's that gift that you have to give so that you can move towards that healing. So yeah, so Mark, after we have that, those kind of two components in place, what would be the next step for someone to heal their marriage?
Well, I think a certain amount of shared goals or understanding needs to happen. Now, what you brought up just a moment ago was very important. You said that sometimes people lash out and they want their partner to feel the same pain that they did. I want to explain that for a second because it goes along with this step. There's a very good reason why people do that, why they lash out and why they say, well, see, now you know how it feels. It might sound vindictive, but what they're really looking for is understanding.
Yes.
And that, yes, that vindictive person is going about it in an unhealthy way, but when there's no healthy outlet, sometimes people go on that unhealthy path. When there's been so much pain there, it is absolutely critical that understanding needs to happen on both sides. So if, we'll keep running with the example of infidelity. If someone's been unfaithful and you just say, okay, you've done something wrong, now you need to fix it, it does not really address the issue of why there was that infidelity in the first place. And yes, once again, we could say, okay, well, it doesn't matter, they did something wrong. But that's not going to get you to the best result if you ignore the cause of the problem to begin with. On flipping that over, it is absolutely important, if you are the offender, that you understand exactly how this is hurting your partner. And this does not involve simply asking, okay, how do you feel? That's a very surface level sort of understanding and is not going to really invite the other person to really open up and share a lot more of that information. There's going to need to be a deep level of inquiry and attentive listening for there to really be some understanding on both sides. We're leaving out the judgment, we're leaving out all the criticism, and we're just putting out the understanding.
Absolutely. I'm so glad you brought that up. Sometimes when we have that sharp pain, it's so easy to look at that. And it's like, if we were to, use the symbolism of a tree, it's like we see this awful, rotten branch that is festering and is killing probably the rest of the tree. And sometimes we think if we just cut off that branch, everything is going to be fine. So making sure that we actually get to the root of the problem. What caused that behavior in the first place? And honestly, what Mark and I have seen is that as we, help couples get to that level of understanding, there's empathy, there's much more forgiveness, and healing can actually occur. And trust becomes restored much faster because you're not wondering anymore, why did this happen? Is it going to happen again? You know why it happened, and you're fixing those things. So it gives a lot of confidence and assurance to the spouse that has been hurt, because you know that, okay, now I understand it really wasn't so much even about me, or maybe there was some things I did contribute to that, but we're fixing those things now on like the root-based level. And so then that real change can occur, which will give you much more confidence and trust in the relationship as you go forward. So that's awesome.
Yeah.
If you guys have any questions, go ahead and drop them in the chat.
I was going to say, the next step there, you get some understanding, and because how can you solve a problem if you don't understand it? It's really important to set some expectations. This is probably, as far as building trust up again, probably the most important step. Setting those expectations is critical, because how do you build up trust? How do you build up that confidence that things are going to happen the way that you say they're going to happen, unless you can set some expectations and follow through on them? Essentially, what you're trying to do, what trust is, and what these expectations are, is a sense of control or certainty in a relationship. If you have trust in a relationship, then you are certain that things will go a certain way. So what we do is we set expectations to establish some certainty, and we follow through on those expectations to give that sense of control there. So these expectations they'll have to apply to whatever the source of pain was. So if it's infidelity, what is expected? What can you add into the relationship to add that measure of control in such a way that it's going to be healthy for both partners? There's unhealthy expectations and there's healthy expectations. Going on with the infidelity example again, we could go and say, okay, well, the expectation is to check the partner's phone every hour and make sure that they're not talking to someone else. Probably a little unhealthy, and it's not very sustainable. And so, identifying what is a clear expectation, what is a sustainable expectation, what is actually feeling healthy for both partners is going to be critical there.
Absolutely. And if you are the one that has broken the trust, expect to give up some freedoms for a little while. That's part of what you need to do to heal something. Think about if you break a bone, like if I broke my arm, just like if we've broken trust, that's going to need some time to mend. And I'm going to lose some freedom because I'm going to have it in a cast for a while to allow that to happen. So this is one of the most challenging parts, probably because it's one of the longest and it's uncomfortable, but it's necessary. Just like if I broke my arm, I couldn't just go use it like I want to. And I couldn't just go, run around, play with my kids and do all these sports and stuff. I'd have to give up some freedoms in exchange for building that trust and allowing that wound to fully heal. So if you're the one that broke the trust, be prepared to give up some freedoms, knowing that it's going to help repair things in the long run.
So Daniel had a good question here. He's asking, how can someone take these steps towards their partner to help them build on this trust when they are the ones struggling but not involved in senior information? I'm getting, to make sure I have this clear. They're the ones struggling, as in they have the problem, and they don't, or yeah, they're the one that's hurt, and they're not seeing the steps that you're taking. that's going to be I'm going to say apologize here. That's going to be a completely other conversation. There essentially what I would see in a situation like that, there are certain barriers getting in the way of really having that communication. What I mean there is, if every time that you connect, every time that you interact, there's a lot of fights and arguments and negativity, you're not going to be able to, have these sort of conversations. In addition, I would say at the same time, a lot of this pain is what's creating these barriers. So what you would do with something like this is you really need to figure out what is getting in the way, what the barriers are right there, then and there. You need to start knocking some of those barriers down. The process for that is, like I said, it's going to be a whole different conversation, and maybe that's something that we can talk about on another week. But there are steps that you can take. Like, how do you catch your partner's attention and help them to see that some changes are being made? How do you have these deeper level conversations when there's so much hurt going on? How do you, if they're not seeing progress, what are the mechanics of what's going on? And, just to briefly touch on that last point, it's very much about this negative narrative that's running through your partner's mind. If they are only able to see the negative aspects of what you're doing, it's going to be really hard to set these expectations and set this in a positive direction. But anyway, like I said, this is going to be turn into a completely different conversation. But yes, I'm glad that you brought that up. That will maybe something we need to bring up on another day, on another live stream.
Yeah, you can also refer, some of these points might cross over to what we did last week on our live stream of what to do if your spouse or you are stuck in the past. That might help kind of bring down some of those barriers. If they're failing to see change or progress, or you're failing to see it, we have some great tips in that live stream. So another good resource for you. Sorry you're sick, Mark.
Yeah, I don't know if everyone can hear it. My voice feels kind of shot at the moment, but that's the beauty of being able to work from my home office here, is I can still be sick and show up, and it's just fine.
So one thing I wanted to touch on real quick was the difference between forgiveness and trust. Okay, forgiveness can be offered rather quickly, and it's something that is given, whereas trust isn't something you can give, it's something you have to earn. So understand kind of the difference there. Forgiveness is one of those first steps to allow trust to really happen. But trust is definitely something that has to be earned. So I'm going to throw that up here. Everyone can see that. Yeah, forgiveness by its very nature can be earned. It can only be given. Trust by its very nature cannot be given. It can only be earned. All right, Mark, final thoughts here, the next step with what we can do to restore trust in our marriages.
And I see Daniel's asking some more questions. What we're going to do, I'll address those comments after the live stream, just briefly. But final thought, I'm sorry, you said final thoughts for how to restore trust. I'm sorry, I'm a little bit cloudy minded right now with feeling sick. Some final thoughts for establishing trust. Like I said, well, I just kind of want to explain the whole situation and just kind of give a big overall picture of how everything works together. Trust is very much a measure of how intimate or close that you feel. Like Heather said, like her husband said, Ben said, that Heather has his heart. That trust there is that measure of vulnerability and openness. So when we break that down, that intimacy, that closeness drops, that sense of control drops. So we then add that sense of control to allow for more openness and more vulnerability to rebuild that intimacy. And you can't just jump from 0 to 100. When you built that relationship up, you built it step by step, and people slowly opened up. In the same sense, when you rebuild trust, the same thing needs to happen. You set the expectations so that you're purposefully moving forward. And then you set milestones along the way, building it up bit by bit. So if the trust if there's no longer that physical intimacy, that physical trust, you set milestones, holding hands for a little while, spending a little bit of time together, snuggling together, and so on and so forth. And you build up those milestones and those expectations, and making sure that that feels good before you move on to the next one. And different types of milestones would be, and expectations are needed for different types of hurt and different types of broken trust. Just like there's different types of intimacy. Yeah, my final thought.
Thank you, Mark. So my final thought is if you're struggling with this, just don't give up, right? There's a beautiful passage in, I'm going to quote the Bible. Okay, if that offends you, that's okay. Just plug your ears. But in the Bible, it says love covers a multitude of sins. And I really love that imagery, love covering up our hearts and our marriages, the cracks in us and our weaknesses, because that love is the strength and the bond, the binding force that really allows for full healing to occur. So if you're struggling with this, don't give up. It's going to take time. It's going to take consistency in maintaining those expectations like Mark was talking about, but it can absolutely happen for you. If you're really struggling with this, we'd invite you to check out our website where we help couples in crisis. And so if you feel like that would be of service to you to help identify the specific issues in your relationship and how to apply this, fully restoring the trust in your marriage, we'd be more than happy to help. But if not, we're so grateful that you're here, and we just want your marriages to thrive. That's what we wake up every day to do. And we appreciate you all. Thank you, Daniel. Thank you for your comments, and thank you for everyone watching. And with that, we will conclude, and I will see you all probably in a couple weeks after my little one is here. And we appreciate you all. We will see you next time.
All right. See you, everyone.